Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a story that has shocked the world. Just a couple of years ago, Bangladesh was celebrated as an economic miracle, a nation that had risen from poverty to surpass even India in per capita GDP. But today the same country is on the brink of collapse, with violent protests, economic disaster and political chaos. How did things go so wrong so quickly? Let's break it down. On 5th June 2014, Bangladesh was thrust into a political and economic crisis that would unravel the very fabric of the nation. What started as a simple student protest quickly escalated into one of the most violent and destructive periods in the country's history. Hundreds were killed, thousands injured, and Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who had ruled the country for decades, was forced to flee the country. Bangladesh, once hailed as a beacon of economic success, was now teetering on the edge of complete collapse. Let's rewind a bit. Just a few years ago, Bangladesh was on top of the world. The textile industry was booming, poverty rates were plummeting, and the country's per capita income had even surpassed that of India's. It seemed like nothing could stop Bangladesh's rise. But then, two major global crises hit: the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine war. For a country like Bangladesh, which relied on textile industry for 80% of its exports, these events were catastrophic. During the pandemic, exports collapsed and millions lost their jobs. The economy was already struggling to recover when the Russia-Ukraine war sent the cost of essential commodities like oil and wheat through the roof. This created a perfect storm. Imports became more expensive, and the country's foreign exchange reserves dwindled from a peak of $48.1 billion in 2021 to just $26.8 billion by June 2024. The Bangladeshi taka lost 36% of its value against the US dollar, and the prices of food and energy skyrocketed. Bangladesh was facing an economic disaster of epic proportions. But the economic woes weren't the only problem. There was also a ticking political time bomb, one that had its roots in the country's history. Bangladesh, like many countries, implemented a reservation system after gaining independence. The idea was to promote social justice by reserving government jobs for freedom fighters and women affected by the 1971 war. But over time, the system became highly controversial. Initially, 80% of government jobs were reserved, leaving only 20% open to merit-based competition. After public outcry, this was reduced, but by 2008, 56% of government jobs were still reserved, with 30% specifically for the descendants of freedom fighters. Imagine this: you are a bright, hard-working young person in Bangladesh, desperate for a government job, but you lose out to someone less qualified simply because their grandfather fought in the liberation war. How would you feel about it? Unsurprisingly, this system led to widespread frustration, especially among the youth. In 2018, this frustration boiled over into massive protests, forcing the government to abolish the quota system. But in 2024, something happened that reignited the flames. On June 5, 2024, the Bangladeshi High Court delivered a bombshell verdict reinstating the 30% reservation for the descendants of freedom fighters. This ruling was like a spark in a room full of gasoline. Students across the country erupted in protest, seeing this as a step back into the past. They blocked roads, stopped trains, and made their voices heard. But instead of addressing the students' concern, the government responded with force, tear gas, rubber bullets, and police crackdowns. This situation quickly spiraled out of control. Then, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina made a fatal mistake. On July 14th, she gave a speech that would pour fuel on the fire. She labeled the protesting students as Razakars. A term refers to collaborators with the Pakistani military during the 1971 liberation war. In Bangladesh, this is one of the worst insults imaginable. The outrage was immediate. Students took to the streets in even greater numbers, chanting slogans demanding justice for the dead and calling for the Prime Minister's resignation. And that's when things turned truly violent. The students' wing of the ruling Awami League launched counter-protests. attacking demonstrators, and the violence spread across the country. The situation became so dire that even the Supreme Court of Bangladesh had to step in, reducing the reservation quota from 56% to 7%. But by then it was too late. The protests had grown too large and too intense. On August 5, 2024, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina resigned and fled to India. Bangladesh was left in chaos. Now, let's talk about what it means for India. First off, Bangladesh is our 8th largest trading partner. With the trade route now completely shut down, India's exports of cotton, tea, coffee, vehicles and machinery have been severely impacted. But there's a bigger issue looming on the horizon: a potential refugee crisis. Back in 1971, during Bangladesh's liberation war, 8.5 million refugees fled to India, costing the country around $700 million in just 1 year. A similar crisis could be on the way if the situation in Bangladesh doesn't stabilize soon. This instability could also spill over into India's northeastern region, further complicating the matters. And this brings us to the critical lessons that India, and indeed every developing nation, must learn from Bangladesh's fall. Lesson number 1. Reservation policies, if not managed carefully, can lead to social injustice and unrest. When reservations are given to unworthy, it creates anger and division. Lesson number 2. Economic diversification is crucial. Bangladesh was too dependent on its textile industry, and when that sector collapsed, so did the economy. And finally, lesson number 3. Vote bank politics may work in the short term, but in the long term, it's a recipe for disaster. Leaders must focus on genuine development and merit-based policies rather than pandering to the specific group for votes. So what's next for Bangladesh? The future is uncertain and the road to recovery will be long and difficult. But for us, the key takeaway is clear. We must learn from these events to avoid making the same mistakes. The story of Bangladesh is a stark reminder of how quickly things can fall apart if we don't address the root causes of social and economic issues. That's it for today's episode. If you found this case study insightful, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comment box. Until next time, stay informed and take care.